Now, what I'm about to do now is to open the feedback session from this roundtable discussion. To recap, the Assembly members have spent the last 40 minutes brainstorming on the 5 questions which are up on the screen as conversation starters, which emerged from the last paper which Brian Carroll presented. So what we're going to do now, and this is obviously an observation mainly for the observers, this is not a question and answer session. What we're going to get now is the feedback, and we're going to go around each table, and the facilitator on the table will give us an outline of the views of the people at the table. It's really about the key topics which emerged during the discussion. And it may be necessary for the facilitators to elaborate on some points raised. And it may be that the members may want to get involved. But if a member wants to get involved, bear in mind you have to be brief. We just want to get an overview. And this overview is going to be very important, I think. And there's a stenographer here and in due course there will be a transcript. And I think it will be of importance to the advisory group from whom we got these questions. And I think it's very important. So we'll start, I think, with table 14. Sorry.
Start at table 1 because they're ready.
Oh, I'll start with table 1 then. Yeah.
I am the facilitator for table 1.
Yes.
There were quite a number of answers to question 1. A lot of them revolved around the issue of the scale of the issue. The timelines are often so far in the future that people think in the present and find it hard to identify. The concept that it is someone else's problem or that someone's individual input can be too small. People have enough to worry about in their general lives, and also that many green solutions are associated with higher taxes, and in particular inconsistent taxes, such as the previous tax on petrol, which gave rise to a rise in diesel cars, and now diesel cars are to be taxed in turn. In response to question 2, the main idea that captivated the table, which crosses 2, 3 and 4, is the idea of having either an equivalent agency to the Citizens Information Centres or to expand the Citizens Information Centres to provide green materials, including information on appropriate recycling materials, appropriate information, booklets and the like, so that that information is distributed across Ireland on an informational basis. It was also noted that the dispersed population makes it very difficult for people to become that green, and that the price of public transport must be reduced. In relation to question 3, the only observation aside from the previous one was that it should be a grassroots effort. In relation to 4, emphasis should be placed on targeting younger children so they grow up believing in green life. And in relation to number 5, it's important to change the planning regulations so that the public become more green efficient. Dublin Bus and other public organisations should play their part. When in refurbishing buildings, it should be mandatory to make them more environmental. And individuals have the obligation to educate others and there should also be show houses to demonstrate greener energy so people can see what changes they can make in their own lives.
Very good. Thank you very much. Is table 2 ready? Yes. Yes, thank you.
Table 2 for question 1. They said, do not understand the science, overwhelmed by the information, too big a problem, scary, fear is demotivating. Some think the damage is done, it's too late, and that actually the consumers switch off, partly because of the way certain devices in their homes are plugged in. like TV devices, and you have to leave them on all the time, or you can't switch those sort of things off, and that sort of initiative maybe could be looked at. For question 2, bureaucracy of administration, difficult to access existing initiatives, lack of factual information. For number 3, submissions to the national dialogue, feedback on the suggestions, clarity on relevant government departments looking after issues. For number 4, all of the above, show positives rather than the negatives. Sustain the green initiatives beyond the schools, bring it out into the communities. And for number 5, public authorities should lead by example. Tidy Town's business model replicated to a green initiative. Carbon neutral buildings should get initiatives. And one of the citizens would actually like to make a statement on this as well.
All right, very good. No.
So I just wanted to say that in regard to the questions that were asked, I just felt that there should be also an obligation on the government to lead by example, and that how can ordinary people be expected to take action on climate change when, as we've heard today, we're failing to meet our own obligations to reduce emissions, and we seem to instead be more focused on excuses as to why we can't meet these obligations. If our government has to be dragged kicking and screaming to take action on climate change, what kind of example does that set for ordinary Irish citizens? And very good.
Would we move on?
I just want to add on to that because the public service, we've a public service in Ireland with 280,000 employees that are housed in their workplace every day. Public authorities and public service needs to lead by example. So it's a follow-on from this comment. The government should implement a carrot and stick approach with regard to how departments are funded. If a department meets targets with regards to low carbon emissions, then they should be rewarded and they should receive extra funding to continue with this work. And if a department fails to do so, then they should be punished for it. It's as simple as that. Incentives, for example, incentives for carbon neutral buildings should be the norm, including retrofit of existing legacy buildings. We have a lot of buildings in the country that are leaking power day and night, okay? And they can be converted to carbon neutral buildings. And we'll see tomorrow of an example of a fire station which did it.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you.
There has been a number of, I suppose, suggestions for question 1. First of all, the answer was yes, that people do feel that they're switched off. And the first reason is that fatigue at listening at constant bad news, and it just feels abstract. Okay. Thoughts of making personal changes can be difficult and also expensive. People are currently embedded in practices that are unfriendly to the environment. So again, that's related to change. It doesn't feel personal, it feels more abstract. People are more concerned with the here and now, so their daily living, getting on with things, than future events. Feeling of impotence, like what can I do kind of scenario. Feel it's more a national and industrial level where the real changes can be made. Let's see. Again, then was just making changes more easily for people, and particularly as people are getting older, say for the adaptation of their houses and maybe putting in solar panels and that type of thing. All those things are difficulties and obstacles. For question 2, again, it was the making of personal changes, making that more easily, and improving our public transport system. For number 3 on the communication, I think it was, we were saying is, local forums and having the knowledge of knowing where to go for communication and with communication. For number 4, then, as regarding advertisements, the table thought maybe TV advertisement, making information more accessible, how to get it. Town halls was one that there was a high regard for. Schools and education at a young age, say in transition years and that, and say civil projects and that. Also podcasts and live streaming. And for question 5 then, say for public authorities, we see their role as to legislate and to facilitate. Perhaps set up a carpooling lane and that for changes. For the private sector to encourage, say, companies that would employ, say, 500 plus, to set up, say, a bus sharing system where they can shuttle people back and forth to work. And for civil society, the suggestion was that a national day, say, where there would be an award made similar to what's done for the tidy towns at the moment. The suggestion was maybe to have a day like a green day or that, and to have the award made that day where it would be awarded that the town or the locality would be called Cool Town, and that it would be an award, say, that would engage communities from school children upwards. Okay. And finally, just for individuals, again, life-changing events.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
The citizens of Table 4 felt that with regard to switching off, they felt that people feel that they are not empowered to make a change individually and that their contribution is a drop in the ocean. With regard to the challenges, they felt that the cost was prohibitive and the complexity of the challenges is a disincentive. With regard to your communicating with their local representatives, social media, and other community-based groups that deal with these civic things, that they're civic-minded people who engage with this issue, they felt that that would be really helpful if they could get involved with other groups such as the Tidy Towns. With regard to engagement, they felt there should be a robust public service announcement and media programme. For example, advertisements on television and social media, that there just isn't enough of them, and that people are not engaging with them because they're not familiar with them. There is some, but not enough. With regard to initiatives, with regard to number 5, they felt there should be initiatives for recycling. All packaging needs to be recyclable. Everything that comes into the house should be capable of being put into your green bin, and that recycling was the responsibility of everybody, every single member of society, that we should be all doing it. And there should be more information on how to dispose of things properly.
Thank you very much. We'll go to Table 5 now.
Table 5 on question 1. For the ordinary person, the language is too scientific, the scale of the problem is too big. Also, there's a lack of guidance and leadership from government, and the problem always seems to be far away and affecting others rather than at a local level. On question 2, the cost of upgrading current housing stock on an individual basis. Also, lack of information on how to mitigate climate change. On 3, there should be an online portal with a national information campaign rolled out to allow people communicate more easily. On 4, a national campaign to highlight national and local effects of climate change that climate change is causing now in local areas, i.e. your county, your village, etc., similar to the photographs shown during the presentation. And on 5, a similar approach that was taken to plastic bags and the smoking ban, e.g. bring in legislation and enforce it.
Thank you very
citizen
much.
at the table would also like to make a statement on behalf of some of the members of the table.
All right.
Thanks. I'm just making a small statement on behalf of the table, most of the people at the table, and it kind of reiterates what was being said at table 2. It was disappointing that no Q&A would take place from the speaker from the National Mitigation Plan and Adaptation Framework. This damages the entire purpose of why we're here, because essentially they are a product of the Department of Environment and Communications, who are refusing to engage and communicate. I was particularly flabbergasted by the fact that we couldn't ask them questions. I don't understand. But in addition to that, we lack leadership, and it's very evident for the last 20 to 30 years on this, that the government could lead by example, which it is not doing, and implement actions rather than just speaking about them and looking for extra reports to be produced. I understand it's very important for research and documentation to be done and finding the best way to do things, but to be starting it in 2017 is shameful. What's wrong with having hospitals having solar panels, for example? Why can't they lead by example? People have shown that you can actually save money. In addition to fixing the climate change through mitigation, we'll be saving money. I mean, I'm getting lost for words because people, and they're asking about why people will switch off. If the government is seen as not even willing to lead, and they're actively refusing to lead, you switch off. Why should you do it yourself if the government won't even do it and they're in a stronger position to do so? Thank you.
Can I just say that it was a decision of the Chair and the Secretariat that this session would be a brainstorming session with the view to hopefully assisting the advisory group. There was nothing sinister about the fact that there wasn't a Q&A. This is the format we thought was the correct format for today, and in particular for the last sessions today. Just want to make that absolutely clear. Yes, thank you.
Citizens at table 6, in relation to question 1, they felt there's a lack of information, that people get bored and feel powerless. The sheer scale of information, graphs and figures are complicated and very technical. It doesn't resonate with people in their daily lives, and it needs to be presented in a simpler and more engaging format. In relation to question 2, the citizens felt requires effort, and it requires change of mindset. On an individual basis, on an individual level, it is expensive. Question 3, citizens felt meet in town halls to discuss the issue and talking to local TDs. Question 4, citizens felt the government should take leadership, legislators, TDs should purchase electric cars and encourage people to do the same. One citizen felt when the government engages with people about climate change, they should link natural disasters to how it impacts on people living in Ireland. Question 5, citizens felt it should start from the top down. Government needs to lead with example. Private sector needs to be held accountable. Authorities need to help those who have been affected by flooding. And it should be made easier for people to reduce their carbon footprint by, for example, give grants for solar panels, etc.
Thank you. Now we're moving to table 7.
Judge, I might be reiterating what some of my colleagues have said, but I'll say them anyway. And the first one there, a serious attitude change needs to be proceeded, and individuals need to know how it affects them. Some people feel they're too small to make a difference and they need to be re-educated. And the second point, it's been said before, the prohibitive cost of solar panels. Fuel boilers with a grant, it can be cheaper to do it without the grant. Profiteering of state bodies, no price control, and there needs to be incentives. And there needs to be long-term benefit, similar to the recycling companies penalising people for putting the wrong rubbish in the wrong bin. And number 3, an independent website, one point of information that will cover grants, all information about saving heat, etc., and frequently asked questions. On number 4, the government successfully succeeded in getting rid of CFC gases, smokeless fuel, plastic bags, and unleaded fuel in cars. So they feel that it's up to the government to make the moves in this area. And lastly, public authorities should lead by example. Only government policy can make significant change to transport, energy, and investment planning. One example they gave about the government was that the CCJ, they should have used solar panels instead of glass. Every little thing each individual does will help. Thank you.
Very good. Very good. Thank you very much. Table 8.
The citizens at this table reiterate a lot of the things that have already been said. In respect to the first question, they do agree that citizens generally tend to switch off on hearing this issue. They feel that this is by reason of the fact that there's nothing they can do about it. They may feel that it is nothing to do with them, or that it's too far, the problem stems too far into the future. The issue is always expressed in very general terms. Also, it hasn't directly affected a lot of people in this country, perhaps, and flooding and other issues tends to be in localised areas. In respect to the second question, the main challenges facing communities and individuals, the citizens at this table feel that one issue is getting politicians to listen to them. Bureaucracy can be a challenge. People individually don't feel empowered. People are willing to be led, and they feel that they're not being led, and the response is not coordinated. For example, we've heard about the fact that there are cattle and peat subsidies. In respect to the third question, how can individuals and communities best communicate their concerns? There was a suggestion that the individuals should be able to approach local government, local councillors, whereas groups or more collective bodies should approach the Department of the Environment directly. Local councils should have a forum. There should be a network at both levels. So there should be intergovernmental committees between governments of different countries, but then the government should also consult with local subcommittees in Ireland. The fourth question, how should the government engage with people? In agreement with a lot of other tables, schools were felt to be an appropriate locus, and examples were raised in the past of good initiatives by the government in respect of recycling, the smoking ban, and indeed drink driving. Advertising is good in that respect. The government should be more authoritative. It should lay down the law. The government needs to take initiative and emphasise that there will be benefits in the long run. Finally, question 5, the different roles for different actors. Politicians need to be held accountable for their decisions. From local level or from national level, there should be consultations with local councils, and local councils should have climate change on their agenda every month. But at the national level, this is important because it will facilitate a coordinated approach. At present, there's no infrastructure for alternatives, and this again would emphasise the role of national level. And then, stemming from national coordination, at the national level would be important to give incentives to local government and individuals. Again, grants for carrying out carbon reducing work on homes. The national level should encourage education programmes, awareness raising, competitions for initiatives, incentivise carpooling, and again, the government should lead by example.
Thank you very much. We're moving to table 9 now, I think.
Thanks. At table 9, we kind of rolled a few into one, so in the interest of remaining brief, I'll answer that. If people switch off, we feel that it's due to a lack of leadership from the government. We've known this is coming and nothing's been done for the last 10 years, so we feel the government should announce a plan, one which will actually be implemented, to include 10 major initiatives subject to time limits, perhaps 2020. For example, complete electrification of transport within a reasonable time frame. That one, not 2020. All new builds subject to minimum standards, such as inclusion of solar panels. New industrial buildings should include living roofs where possible. Support and incentivise hydroponic farming. Landfill waste reduction. Replace peat harvesting with solar panels on that same land. Move towards plastic-free supermarkets, paper bags for fruit and veg, etc. The free recycling of plastic, and encourage the planting of native trees on farmland and incentivise the same. Just with regard to question 4, we weren't really interested on how the government wanted to engage with the public on the issue. We felt that's not the issue. We want them to act on what's already in front of them.
Very good, thank you very much. Now we're in table 10.
Judge, for the answer to number 1, the message is not clear enough. People don't understand, as the numbers in the public domain don't sound serious, i.e. 1% increase does not sound very serious. It doesn't seem like it's a priority, no strong leadership from government on climate change. Number 2, there's no real ownership of problems, no government support. The cost of making home improvements is often cost prohibitive. Number 3, lobby, politicians and EPA, county councils should be involved, the equivalent of tidy towns for climate change. Number 4, TV advertisement and programmes, educating adults and children and make the problem real. And for number 5, incentive by realistic grants for home insulation, easier to access grants for a single item and tree planting, having climate ambassadors. Okay?
Thank you very much. Table 11 now.
Thank you, Judge. In response to question 1, it was highlighted that people know that there is a cost, both financially and otherwise, and this is partially why they may switch off. And also the approach to view that it doesn't affect the current moment and that somewhere down the road, this might be why people don't necessarily take it as serious. The scale of the problem that some people may find intimidating was raised. It was raised by a member that there's a lack of leadership, and it would be possibly better if it was coming from the Taoiseach, the issues of climate change, and people might take it more serious then. The issue of media was raised in relation to this as well, that there's no large-scale campaigns, and also about the Paris Agreement, that not enough people know about it, so that all them reasons could be possibly why people switch off. In response to question 2, the reasons of cost and money were raised again, and for an example for challenges, the expense of solar panels and all that sort of equipment was raised. Lack of information, lack of leadership and lack of resources was also raised, and that people sometimes just don't necessarily buy into the whole issue of climate change. In relation to question 3, it was suggested by a member of the table that local communities work to organise themselves and form a delegation, and it was raised by another member of the table that maybe local communities or individuals would be better to ring Joe Duffy if they had an issue to really express concern or get the matter raised.
In other words, tell it to Joe.
In response to question 4 and government engagement, the members agreed with the points in the question that town hall meetings, social media, TV and radio and advertising was a good approach to take. It was highlighted by a member that it should start with children and inform them in a fun way the issues of climate change. Establishment of a national organisation with central communication to spread word on climate change issues was raised, and it was raised by a member. A suggestion from a member was that to remove the car park that's provided free to all TDs, both past and present, in Leinster House, and this should be done at once to encourage that TDs and the people in Leinster House would use public transport or cycling methods as well. In response to question 5, it was raised by a member at the table that hospitals could take a lead in efficiency and to look at take small steps to make them greener in such areas as recycling. The reason for this is that it would improve cost efficiency not only for the hospitals, but they could also provide financial incentives just to make hospitals greener, and they could take an approach of leading the way forward. It was suggested as well that in the private sector, companies should be encouraged to draw up their own plans on how to be greener, and this will lead to positive PR. Local authorities have a role to play here, was highlighted by a member, and that they should lead in energy efficiency, particularly in the likes of street lighting and areas such as that. It was highlighted by a member of the table in relation to shopping centres, and with specific reference to the Dundrum shopping centre. The member actually lives quite close to it, and the member highlighted that the centre is lit up 24 hours a day, the lights are constantly on, and it has a massive cost, that should be addressed. So they had suggested that companies should be encouraged to turn off lights or possibly fined if they're not meeting certain targets. The Green Schools Action Expo should be rolled out to all schools around the country. This was highlighted by a member. The use of the carbon footprint calculator was also highlighted by another member, and better engagement from the EPA was also raised in relation to this. A member has also asked me to state a plan or an idea that they had, and they felt that the idea of setting up green hubs or climate change hubs around the country in communities to provide information and act as a method of engagement, and that they should take the approach of starting local and building it up with pop-up educational hubs to inform people and raise awareness, using the likes of technology such as apps for communication and to spread the campaign. And also that they should engage with school children and in specific reference to transition year students.
Yeah, thank you very much. Then table 12, I think.
Sorry, Judge, the member actually just wants to speak
All
for
right.
1 second.
Yeah.
What the member wants to highlight is that the climate change calculator should be made available to all citizens for their use.
Thank you, Judge. In relation to question number 1, citizens at this table had a number of comments on all questions. People don't understand and are overwhelmed by the scale. It's not about us, it's a problem for the next generations. There's no sense of urgency generated when looking at dates of 2050. There is an absence of short-term focus. There's also an educational gap in providing people with practical examples of what people can do to act in the short term to address this issue. There's an absence of leadership from the top, meaning from government level. And there is also, it is not helped by the negative policies of some TDs. In relation to question number 2, the main challenge is seen as cost, and for individuals, the grant structures are seen as not being a sufficient incentive around improving homes, for example, and that they're too little. It seems that there's an onus on the private sector to address this that is not matched by government. And a further challenge is in the area of prioritisation, and that climate change has to compete with other issues, such as more immediate issues, such as homelessness. In relation to question number 3, about how individuals and communities could best communicate their concerns, it is by their own actions. For example, the Walk to Schools scheme, the example of the fire station, which has been mentioned a couple of times and will be discussed tomorrow. And that in these ways, individuals and communities are exemplary to other communities. In relation to question number 4, in relation to government, again, by their own actions, both individually and collectively, for example, the use of ministerial cars, that such cars should be more environmentally vehicles. Advertising campaigns focusing on benefits to the individuals of taking certain actions. Public buildings should become more efficient, and that has been mentioned a couple of times. School education programs, starting at primary school, should be action-based education where there are examples for people, and in this way kids can educate the adults. There should be more engagement with people on social media, as some people are too busy to be attending town hall meetings on this topic. In relation to number 5, it was suggested that there should be a prohibition on ministers for a period after they leave office from entering the private sector in non-environmentally friendly companies. In relation to individuals, the suggestion there is to move to the bike and move to public transport. And the expensive structure for public sector and for the Oireachtas is seen as one that favours car usage. Public authorities generally should be leading by example, and an example of that was an Inclusion Week, which is a community-based activity in a local authority. And finally, climate change should take precedence over public sector activity. Thank you, Judge.
Productivity, yeah. Thank you very
Over
much.
the private sector.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, over the private sector.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. And then table 13.
Judges, some of the observations from table 13 in relation to number 1, it was seen as not relevant. There was a general negativity around climate change and talk about it, volumes of information, overwhelming, and it was described as a boring topic maybe to younger generation. And one comment was, I'm only one, there's a sense of individual helplessness about it. Recommendations or suggestions, again, education was brought into this to make it more immediate to lifestyle. One citizen used the analogy of the smoking ban, drink driving. These campaigns were successful, and that's something, this requires a cultural change as well. The Green Party were described as a joke, and that there was some of this was too long-term and was described as horizon planning. Solar panels, incentivised measures like this a bit more with tax breaks. The cost of energy, again, is an issue. In number 2, relating to challenges facing communities, there doesn't seem to be a structure in place that people can use to do things about improving our emissions and climate change. And as individuals, using cars for most people is unavoidable because basically where they live there's no public transport. In number 3, communication again is still sometimes being done through the local TD. Letters might be written, but you can be guaranteed that no responses is the most likely outcome. Parish councils were talked about, tidy towns committees and so on. But I think the lack of structure was a big problem here. People don't seem to know, how to go about this as a group and as individuals. In relation to number 4, there was a suggestion about campaigns that they should be reduced, to reduce emission targets, etc. Campaigns should be more bite-sized and manageable, and more short-term. In relation to the government's approach in communicating to the community, it should be a sort of an interdepartmental approach with one harmonised message across all departments. And in relation to number 5, a lack of leadership, that we should be making more demands on our local authorities. And one citizen pointed out that a company called Uber were refused a licence to operate in Dublin recently, and they're kind of a taxi pooling business, and that companies like this should be allowed to trade. And there should be further penalties. There's another suggestion as well for companies who don't minimise in their packaging. And there's also a citizen at this table who would like to make a contribution.
All right.
Thank you, Paul. I think, Judge, it's true to say from the comments that the temperature at the table, as we were discussing these issues, rose by several degrees Celsius. But I am glad to report that there were no extreme events following that. But I think Paul actually covered extremely well the points. There's just one point that we were very strong about, and that was the lack of structure. It's been referred to by several people at several tables. I live in Newbridge, and we have about 26,000 people, if you take Newbridge and the surrounds. We're twinned with 3 different cities, one in Germany, one in France, and one in the US. And when we visit those, we can see exactly what is missing in our society. And it is democratic representation at an executive level, at town and village and rural area. We don't have it. They have it, and as a result, they would not be having a forum like this, because this is a very positive forum, but it's trying to capture the actual democratic voice of people with regards, because there is no way of capturing it in Newbridge. There is no body structure in the town to capture. So if the government wants to talk to us, they must speak to the local authority, who is the body that's in the area that will correspond with the population in that county. And that's the same. There is no authority in any, whether it's Athlone, whether it's Mullingar, Listowel, there is no authority in any town to represent the people democratically. And this covers question 2, 3, 4, and 5. So really, the addressing the climate change action by everybody, to me, is responsibility by nobody. You need leadership, you need executive function. It is very clear it's the responsibility of government. It is through their local authorities, if we don't change structures, to give a power and the authority to people in towns and villages to actually have a structure where they have an executive function, not just an input into a document. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, table 14.
Good evening, Judge. In respect to question number 1, the table noted that there's too much doom and gloom in relation to climate change, and they felt that there's an absolute lack of positive reinforcement. Furthermore, they felt that there's a lack of financial incentive for people to get actively involved in climate change. They felt that if a person amends their lifestyle to reduce their carbon footprint, there doesn't seem to be any reference to any grants or rebates or tax rebates available to them. In respect to question number 2, they note that there's a lack of connection between the various government departments. They felt that there's an over-reliance on the car in respect to transportation. The government seems to overly invest in roads, whereas public infrastructure and public transportation appears to be ignored. A further challenge, they noted that where the citizens wish to rely on public transportation with a view to minimising the use of a car, they had 3 problems with public transportation. Number 1, there's a degree of a lack of trust in it regarding running times and its availability. Number 2, they felt that public transportation is quite expensive for the service they receive. And number 3, in respect to citizens, particularly in rural areas, they felt there's an inaccessibility to public transportation. Regarding number 3, they note that they felt that local councils and local authorities, they play a big role in both encouraging the communities and also listening to the concerns of the citizens. The citizens at this table went out of their way to say that the tidy towns and similar sorts of organisations are a very good inspiration. They felt that the tidy towns and such like had quite reasonable success, and that was on the basis of positive reinforcement. They felt that the people who got involved in these matters and the community engagement, they were shown what was the positive action to do rather than being told about negative items or what not to do. Furthermore, in respect to point number 3, they note financial incentives. They felt that if they can see a benefit in their pocket, they would certainly research the matter themselves, and they would quickly learn about it far quicker than any other marketing campaigns. They also noted regarding the graphics of worst case scenarios. They felt there was some merit to that, but again, the graphics would only work where they go hand in hand with positive reinforcement and the individuals are told what they are to do in order to avoid such issues. In respect to number 5, they note that it may be a matter for public authorities to look into trialling pilot projects for self-sufficient towns. I note some of the citizens at the table suggested that there's smaller towns in Europe where they aim towards being self-sufficient. They were unsure whether or not there's some towns in Ireland that may be available or trialling this role, but they felt that this is something that the public authority should look into. And finally, one of the citizens at the table noted that they were quite disappointed that America and a certain president of America has not engaged or fully ignored the Paris Agreement, and they felt they were concerned that this might water down the attitude of other countries towards the Paris Agreement.
Thank you very much. Well, that's all been very, very interesting, and I'm very grateful to the members for the feedback. As soon as possible, we'll put the transcript up on the website so that you can access it, the public can access it, government bodies can access it. And I do think it was a useful exercise, and there's a lot to be learned from it. Oh yeah, and of course, Sharon reminds me, and this is the whole object of the exercise, we'll feed it back to the advisory group in the climate dialogue action. Yeah. So it's really, the objective is to assist them and to assist the public. So that's all we have to do today. You'll be glad to hear it's been a long day. We've a lot of concentration. Let's say we're all fairly tired at this stage. I'm very grateful to all of the speakers, and we have had very informative presentations, and we have material on which we can work tomorrow and the next weekend. So this evening, I hope you'll have a relaxing evening. We'll be meeting, as you know, at around 6:45, and we'll have dinner afterwards. And some of you might prefer to watch Strictly. I've no objection if that's the case. But I hope to see you all this evening. Thank you very much.